No one will read the bill. No one knows what's in it, and there is no reform in the bill. That I can say with absolute certitude. No one will read it, no reform, nothing gets better, the debt will grow. How come you were against President Obama's deficits, and then how come you're for Republican deficits? Isn't that the very definition of intellectual dishonesty? If you were against President Obama's deficits, and now you're for the Republican deficits, isn't that the very definition of hypocrisy?
All right, that was Senator Rand Paul on the Senate floor yesterday, apparently annoying a lot of his fellow senators, but standing up for the right thing, upon which, too, I guess Bette Midler is hoping that some lunatic comes back into his house and starts beating on him again, which is a separate question. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky joins us now. Hour 2, Sean Hannity Show. How are you?
Hey, Sean. Pretty good. Yeah, I think I might be one of the least popular people on Capitol Hill right now.
Senator, there's nothing you said there that's not true. I do believe we need the $80 billion in more defense spending. I really do. I think we've allowed our military to deteriorate to a certain extent. I think we are far too extended around the world. That needs to end. We can't be the world's policeman. We have to make certain strategic positions, but the amount of money and the amount of debt we're accumulating was something I was whining and complaining about under the Obama years, and we're not stopping it.
Well, I take it very personally because, I ran for office. You remember when I ran, I came on your program on television and on the radio in 2009, 2010, and we were alarmed at annual deficits approaching and exceeding $1 trillion under President Obama, and we were unified. There was this voice. The whole Tea Party movement arose because we were so concerned with so much debt being accumulated and all of this spending, and we rose in one voice. You remember the rallies, over 100,000 people in the mall in Washington, D.C., saying we can't spend money we don't have, and so now for Republicans to have the same thing, to have deficits that will exceed $1 trillion in 1 year, it just can't be. People are going to wonder who we are as a party or as conservatives if we complained about President Obama and then we do the same thing.
Well, what are we going to do now? Because this is now it. This is the bill. This has been passed. This is a 2-year deal. And while I believe we're going to see significant economic growth, and I believe that growth will generate a lot of revenues, in Reagan's years, we doubled the revenues to the government. We've seen record revenues, but, the problem in Reagan's years is for every new dollar they brought in, Congress spends $1.32. You can't balance a budget that way.
Well, and that's exactly what's going to have now. Any growth in revenue from growth in the economy is going to be frittered away in new spending. And but the interesting thing is though they've raised the spending caps for 2 years, you realize this is only a month-long bill. We're going to be back having the same fight in a month, but they probably won't touch the caps in a month, but they'll have to re-vote on spending in a month. So my plan is to bring up the amendment again to try to have fiscal restraint by having spending caps and to try to reinstitute them. But in all likelihood, I'll lose because we don't have enough votes. And so the only thing people can do, and I know a lot of your listeners are frustrated, is there will be Republican primaries. Look at the candidates long and hard and try to vote for the ones who are unafraid to stand on their own 2 feet, unafraid to say enough's enough, we're not going to add more debt, and unafraid to vote against spending. And really it does take some courage because there's a certain amount of groupthink that goes on and a certain amount of, coercive pressure, a certain amount of, you have to be one of the club and you'll be expelled if you don't toe the line. And you need candidates that will stand out and be brave. And you can tell that somewhat by
there's very few of you. I mean, remember in 2013, you actually went down to offer him support. Ted Cruz was saying we can end Obamacare. We have the authority to defund it, and they were never serious about it. We learned in 2017 you have 7 colleagues that voted for your bill, which was to just repeal it. As straight repeal of Obamacare. 2017, when it would have worked and it would have mattered, the 7 of them changed their mind magically, which tells me they were never serious about that vote in the first place. It was a show vote.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is that so many of these people are just weak-kneed and they have insufficient confidence in capitalism and freedom. Free people, free minds, free interactions, voluntary transactions does amazing things. The wealth of our country is just extraordinary. And we need to apply those same principles to healthcare that we apply to every other facet of our economy. We don't have price controls in anywhere else in the economy. We don't have the government fixing the prices. We allow prices to go up and down. We let people save. There are all kinds of ways we could fix. And one of the things I'm going to do this spring is the Republican leadership has said they're not going to introduce a budget. I'm going to introduce my own budget, and my budget will be a freeze in spending. And what we'll also introduce is budget reconciliation instructions to expand HSAs. I want to expand HSAs significantly, so it would be a significant tax cut because you get to deduct that, what you put in your HSA, your health savings account. And then I'm going to let people take their HSA and I'm going to let them use it for diet plans, exercise plans, vitamins, for a variety of things. So we're going to let you put more money in your HSA and let you use it for more things. But the only way we can get that done is actually able to convince Republicans to vote for a budget and vote for budget reconciliation instructions that I'll introduce. But because it's a privileged resolution, I may well be able to get a vote on this coming up in April.
Let me ask you about the FISA extension, too. Interesting how that passes before we get the Nunes memo from the House Intel Committee. And I thought it was even more explosive in the Grassley-Graham unredacted memo, which I've been spending a lot of time on. And we've learned an awful lot of things here. We know the bulk of the FISA warrant against an opposition candidate, in this case the Trump campaign, and then an incoming president, came from Hillary Clinton's bought and paid for phony, salacious Russian government in part, but Russian dossier. She bought and paid for this thing. And not only was it designed to lie to him, manipulate the American people with those lies before an election, but then it became the basis for a FISA warrant. And they became the bulk of the evidence. And it was also renewed 3 separate times, with it again being the bulk of evidence. Now, I know you care about our Constitution, Senator Paul. I care about our Constitution. You're very well versed in the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. You know, this was the concern of many of us when we were debating the FISA law when it first came up.
I think what's become very apparent and sort of is incontrovertible is that we had biased people and do have biased people in the FBI who hated the president, hated the candidate, Donald Trump, and we're actually plotting and discussing trying to prevent him becoming president at work, on their work phones, in meetings at work. You've got Strzok, you've got his mistress Page, but also going to McCabe's office and really discussing how they can prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. So we know that there was bias, and when we know this can happen, it basically says what James Madison told us from the very beginning, that men are not angels. And because men are not angels, they need rules and they need restrictions on their behavior and their power. And one of the checks and balances was basically that anyone who had the power to search a home would have to first ask a judge for a warrant. And this check and balance has worked and served us well for 200 years. But I think the example of having so many biased people up there that are trying to bring the president down is evidence of why we need a warrant requirement. These people should not be allowed to search the database. And this is what I asked the FBI director last week. I said, can Strzok and can Lisa Page and Bruce Orr, can they still search this database? Could they type in Americans who gave money to Donald Trump and look them up for their pleasure and try to bring them down for phony, trumped-up tax charges? Can they look at this database and try to develop cases against Trump supporters without a warrant? If they don't have a warrant, they could be sitting in their office as we speak doing this. And so this is why I requested in the legislation that we put forward was that there be a requirement that you get a judge's warrant. I've talked to the president about this. I think he's sympathetic to it. And I think that we can still revisit it. We lost the vote the last time, but it was on a bigger bill. My hope is that we revisit this and we just specifically ask one thing, that any time an FBI agent or anybody from Department of Justice wants to type in an American's name, they have to ask a judge first.
Well, I think that, but what happens when we know now that when this was presented to the judge for the FISA warrant in this case, we know that they knew that it was Hillary Clinton bought and paid for, DNC bought and paid for, and all they did was add a footnote saying it might have a political taint to it, and that was it. They purposely withheld that from the FISA judge. Andrew McCabe even acknowledged and admitted without the phony dossier and the Russian dossier, there is no warrant. So at some point, if you lie to a FISA judge this way to spy on an American citizen, right?
Even if you have a cursory understanding of the law and watch legal shows on TV, you realize that when the prosecutor doesn't tell the defense attorney about evidence, they call it exculpatory evidence, evidence that might prove or bring doubt to the case. A lot of times the judge will throw out all charges because they said you didn't play the game of justice fair. The game of justice is that you have to reveal your evidence. The prosecutor has to reveal that to the defense attorney so the defense attorney can prepare a defense. So in this case, there's no defense attorney. There's only the prosecutor. But if the prosecutor is dishonest or deceitful and doesn't tell the judge that this came from the Hillary Clinton campaign, I think it taints the whole investigation. And really, I hope Mueller is looking at this, and I hope Mueller is saying to himself, I can't believe they started this with a Hillary Clinton Oppo hit piece on Trump.
Well, I want to pick up right there. We got to take a quick break, though, if you don't mind. Senator Rand Paul is with us, and I want to ask you about that. 800-941-SEAN, if you want to be a part of the program. A lot more news we're getting to in the course of the program. Victoria Tunsing represents the informant in the Uranium One case. Also, Joe DeGeneva has been very critical of what has happened with this FISA warrant, the dishonesty before the court, and so much more. All right, as we continue, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky single-handedly drove the United States Senate nuts last night, but for all the right reasons, standing up for fiscal responsibility and other issues. We're talking about the FISA warrant, bought and paid for, Hillary Clinton warrant, basically. You mentioned Robert Mueller as we were going to the break. If you don't have this phony dossier becoming the bulk of evidence, information presented to a FISA judge, but not the FISA judge not knowing it's from Hillary Clinton, not knowing how political it is, and then all of this mess involving Robert Mueller occurs in this last year. There's been no evidence to this point of Trump-Russia collusion. How does this continue? How do they keep this charade going on? And when does it have to come to an end? And how could it end?
Well, here's the interesting thing. If you don't have Hillary Clinton's paid-for dossier, you don't ever get a FISA warrant. And really, you never end up getting a special prosecutor in Robert Mueller at all. Robert Mueller would not be doing this at all had there not been an original dossier that they lied to the court about or withheld information to the court about. So none of this would have occurred without the initial deceit of sort of Clinton apparatchiks in the FBI actually presenting something and not telling the entire truth about it. So, yeah, I think the whole thing is tainted from top to bottom. How does it end? I don't know how the president could possibly take questions from an investigation that's so tainted. The only people that I know of so far who actually paid the Russians any money were Hillary Clinton, who paid a British spy to give Russians money to try to get dirt on Trump. And so, I think the thing is if there was any semblance of fairness, Mueller should now be turning his attention to Hillary Clinton and Hillary Clinton's collusion with the Russians. And if they're not going to do that, really the whole thing's just a witch hunt to go after Trump and politically motivated and ought to just end.
Are you convinced that that's what it is, knowing what we know now? Because obviously, to me, it is. It's always been.
I've always thought the whole thing was sour grapes. It was the Clinton people and Obama. They said, at the very end, we're going to get Trump one other. We're going to spread all this gossipy, salacious stuff that we paid for from the Russians. We're going to spread it throughout the Intelligence Committee and make sure that we try to take him down. And so that's what this has been about. They thought they deserved to win. They thought that, it was sort of an office they had inherited. And they thought, for sure she was going to be president. And then when she wasn't, they decided to try to bring him down another way. But the bottom line is Mueller has to make a decision when he's done. And there's got to be a decision made where he's going to make a sitting president testify. And I just don't think it's a good idea to have or to force the president to go in and ask questions about, his business dealings 25 years ago. For him to talk to them, I think it would have to be very limited, questions in writing, and it would have to be about.
I don't think any good lawyer would ever let that happen. It would go to the Supreme Court beforehand, because especially in light of the circumstances in which this came into being. No way. All right, Senator Paul, good job last night. I wish you were more successful. And you're right, Republicans, they're really conservative when Democrats are in power. But, boy, that conservatism vanishes right after, doesn't it?
It's not over till it's over. This is a rallying call for conservatives, that conservatives are not dead. There is still a movement in Washington. Mike Lee was a big help on this, and Mike Lee and I are working very hard to try to say, you know what, we can't just keep spending money we don't have. There still is a conservative movement, and so we want people to continue to rally to the cause and not give up.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Rand Paul.